All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today we'll be looking at my 2022 Pac-12 predictions. There's timestamps below if you'd like to skip around. I'll be extensively talking about the top three teams I have predicted to finish 1, 2, and 3, and then to cap things off, we'll be talking about all the teams and then some awards along with my conference title predictions. So kicking things off, USC 12-0. My co-host Nick, who's unable to join us today, he picked USC to go 12-0 as I am a Trojan fan. But when you look at the schedule, it aligns for USC to run through the competition. It's mainly because of this offense. Caleb Williams transfers over, follows Lincoln Riley. Very poised, strong arm, great runner, high IQ player. 1,900-plus yards passing, 24 touchdowns, 4 picks, 435 on the ground, and another 6 scores. He took over on October 9th and did not look back. Williams, he made so many good plays, not just in that Texas game where he made his debut, but throughout the year, he really carried this offense. The passing attack was, a little sluggish throughout the year, but overall, Williams did so many good things for this offense. They significantly lacked explosiveness at Oklahoma last year with Rattler under center. He comes in and he changes that significantly. He has got 3 transfers in the backfield. Darwin Barlow from TCU from last year, added in with Travis Dye from Oregon, 1,200 rushing, 16 touchdowns, another 400-plus yards through the air, 2 more scores. He's a dual-threat guy that shined with the Ducks last year. And Austin Jones, a respectable dual-threat back. His skills will certainly be used in this offense. He's also from Stanford. They also added 5-star Relic Brown, a flip from OU. So this is an absolutely loaded backfield for USC. The wide receiver group is even more promising. These guys are incredibly stacked. 4 transfers. 3 of them should start. Jordan Addison's the first one, the Blitnikoff Award winner from last fall. Great deep speed. Juicy route runner, nearly 1,600 yards, 17 touchdowns last year. Addison comes over from Pitt to pair up with Caleb Williams. And then Brendan Rice will be at his disposal as well. A muscular built frame for a guy at 6'3", 205, a special teams contributor who was not used enough at Colorado, the son of Jerry. He's pegged right now as a starter. Then you also got Williams. He's a slot weapon. They love to use him underneath. Taj Washington, second on the team in receptions and yards, over 17 yards per carry at Memphis in 2020. He was really good. The past 2 years, I'd say he's an explosive playmaker, and I think he's going to get involved more so this year as the offense starts to find its mold. Michael Jackson, Kyle Ford, Gary Bryant, all solid contributors, so they have plenty of stars, and they got plenty of depth as well. So I think this receiving core, they also got Terrell Bynum from Washington. They're in good hands. Offensive line, for USC was a big struggle under Clay Helton. As soon as he departs, though, the O-line shows up. It was a quite impressive group last year. They pick up 6'7" Bobby Haskins from UVA to join a few seniors, headlined by Andrew Voorhees, a 6th-year man. Can play 4 different spots on the O-line. He's looking the first. He's probably going to be a first-rounder next year's draft here at tackle. He played very well last season for USC. I think the biggest concern, though, for the Trojans is the defense. They only returned 3 starters from a unit that was pretty bad. They had 7 transfers, though. Talani from KSU, Earl Barquette from TCU, Corey Foreman, he's former number 1 ranked recruit. He's going to lead these guys here. They got a few veterans on the D-line. Tulaha, he led the team with 5.5 sacks last year. Brandon Philly, 345 pounds. Only 21 sacks from last season from 8 different players, so there was a little bit of contribution from everybody, but only 21 sacks was not good. Completely revamped linebacking core here for USC. Romeo Height and Shane Lee come over from some SEC schools. And they also picked up Eric Gentry from Arizona State, another in-conference ad, 45 tackles. He was a first-team all-freshman last year in the conference. Combine those guys with Renlon Goforth. He was second on the team in tackles last year. They got a really good core. I think more awareness and playmaking is needed, though. I think they're just really trying to learn how to play football again because it was not very disciplined. They would take bad angles. They could not stop the run. Just poor effort from the front 7. The same can be kind of said about the secondary. The pass defense has struggled with penalties. No pass rush allowed these corners. It forced them, rather, to have their back turned, for a long time. So they would hold up for a little bit. And then after a while, things would break loose. 25 pass breakups was 124th in college football. OU, for example, was 125th. This is obviously a big area Lincoln Riley had to focus on last year that they weren't able to accomplish. So he's going to have to do the same thing here at USC. They added plenty of talent, though. 4 new ads. Latrell McCutcheon comes over from Oklahoma. Mekhi Blackman, another guy from Colorado. Blackman was pretty good in coverage, I'd say, during his tenure with the Buffaloes. Damani Jackson, Zion Branch, 2 high-end recruits. We'll see if those guys get involved. A lot of people are really excited for Kalen Bullock, though. Really shined with his ball skills. Needs to get bigger. Needs to get better as a tackler, and I think that's the biggest focal point for him this offseason. I think him and Xavier Alford, as redshirt freshman last year, made some really good plays. 3 picks for Alford. So USC, very talented bunch, top to bottom. We did an in-depth preview on all of these teams if you'd like to check them out on the page. USC, though, 12-0. The defense, we'll see what happens. There's some young, impressive talent there. They just have to play good football, I think. But for the schedule-wise, USC should run over everybody with this offense. They're completely loaded. They probably won't be an undefeated football team. They play at Utah, but I think 12-0 is a good mark just because of how talented this offense is. No one in the conference is really going to compete with them other than Utah here at 11-1. The defending conference champions, Kyle Whittingham, Andy Ludwig, Morgan Scally. These guys have been together for a couple of years now. 8 starters are back on this offense. They averaged 36.1 points per game last year. Offensively struggled early in the year with Charlie Brewer. They started 1-2. Cam Rising was given the go at some point in that San Diego State loss, and he performed quite well. And, he was the starter the rest of the year. Ended the season with 2,500 yards as a passer, 20-5 TD to INT ratio, 499 yards and 6 scores on the ground as a runner. Very savvy football player. Doesn't have the traits that will jump off the screen, but as a leader, it's been around a few seasons. 6'2", 220 pounds. He's very appreciative for the opportunity, it seems, to be leading this football team. 191 yards per game through the air. Britton Covey, he arrived in 2015, was actually a junior last season, but he finally moves on. That's about it. Everyone else is back in this receiving core. They returned 2 great tight ends. These guys are 2 opposite players. Brant Cooley, 6'2", 230, really isn't a tight end due to his size. And, they get him in the slot, out wide, good route runner, strong after the catch. Dalton Kincaid, he's 6'4", 242. He's got great ball skills and a much better contested catch guy. They were first and third on the team in receiving yards last year, respectively. They both had 500-plus yards and 14 touchdowns combined. These guys are just 2 opposite players, 2 great tight ends overall, though. Should be fun to see how they're utilized this fall. Devon Valil enters his 4th year at pass catcher. He's technically a rising sophomore, though. Averaged nearly 17 yards per catch last season, only 23 grabs last year. Solomon Ennis, his 5th year as well, only 22 receptions himself. There's some vets at wide receiver. Returning production isn't exactly great. I'm not really worried, though. The way this offense operates doesn't call for great wide receiver production, more so consistency, and they have those 2 tight ends there to bail them out. So I think the passing attack, they're going to be just fine, especially when you look who they have at running back. 3 different backs last season had 500-plus yards. They do lose TJ Pledger, but return 2 good starters. Tavion Thomas, 1,100-plus yards, 21 touchdowns. School record there, 6'2", 221. He's a nice inline runner, staggering in between the tackles. He's a thumper, nice and short area, impressive change of direction and acceleration. A long line of great runners here under Kyle Whittingham at Utah, and they all seem to be similar, but the upside here with Thomas seems to be unlike any other. Very excited for his season. And Micah Bernard, 87 carries for 529 yards. He also caught 26 passes for 251. Only found the end zone 4 times, but he's an athlete. They had him playing corner in that Rose Bowl, covering Jackson Smith-Njigba. Obviously, that didn't go very well, but he had 10 tackles, and he caught a touchdown in that game. So this is a heck of an athlete. Nice 1-2 punch here. Looking up front, though, for the Utes, they replaced 2 starters, one being Nick Ford, who's an all-conference performer. I'm not worried, though. Sources around the program have raved about Paul Molley, 6'2", 304. Great communicator, high football IQ. He seems to be next in the line to be a breakout star here at center. Keaton Bills, he's back at right guard, stayed at 8 games on the other side of last year, so we'll see how he makes that transition. It should be very smooth. Braden Daniels, he's a second-team all Pac-12 performer at left tackle last season. He's not the biggest at 6'4", 299, but he's tough, disciplined. Lamua as well. He's been a vital piece to this unit for a few years. So offense, I think they'll continue to get better. They did not lose much one bit outside of TJ Pledger. I think these guys are going to continue to get better. Looking at the Utes defense, they get back only 5 starters, and they had a number of guys declare early. Devin Lloyd was the only draftee, but they had a number of freshmen make an impact last year, all different levels. The D-line has always been a strong, physical, productive unit. 2022 figures to be no different. 10 of the 14 players on this defense recorded a sack last year were freshmen, so plenty of youth hit the field and made an impact. Junior Tafuna is probably the most exciting one, 6'5", 290. He was a stout nose last year for them in his debut year. They got Devin Kafusi there, too. He's been around for a couple years. All of his brothers played at BYU, and he ends up here, 6'7", 300 pounds. That's pretty impressive size. So they're going to look to get him involved. Seems to be too much size to not get on the field. Van Fillinger, another young player that shined off of the D-line, 9.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. Jonah Ellis, he might slot into the opposite defensive end spot. His dad coaches the defensive tackles now, so we'll see what happens. Pass rush is a little interesting group to watch, but I think the addition of Gabe Reed from Stanford is going to be big for them. He played a lot of snaps for the Cardinal over the last couple of years. 10 tackles for loss last year, along with 61 tackles. He had 7.5 tackles for loss or more in 3 of his 4 seasons with Stanford. Not much of a pass rusher, but he does a great job of collapsing the run. Depth might be an issue early on, but this team always has strong rotational help on the D-line. That's in terms of pass rush. I'm not incredibly thrilled with the depth, but on the interior, I think they're going to be just fine. Linebacker is the biggest concern, though. Devin Lloyd, Nephi Sewell. These guys depart. They add Mohamed Diabate, though, from Florida. He was the leading tackler for the Gators a season ago. And, of course, they will play at Florida week 1, so it'll be interesting to see how he performs against his former ball club. Landry Barton, though, one of the highest-ranked commitments in school history, 93rd overall recruit, a top 10 linebacker, has good size of 6'4", 220. The athletic traits that allow him to match up in coverage as well or come off the edge. Figures to get on the field in some capacity. Same can be said of Ethan Calvert, the brother of Bo, who plays at UCLA. He was actually ranked higher than Barton as a recruit. He's a physical, he's tough, already arrived with the characteristics that make plays on this roster, gets downhill fast, has nice instincts as a former safety. So I'm circling those 2 guys to get on the field here at linebacker. I think Barton and Calvert will play a big role in one way or the other. think they're going to be just fine at linebacker. Very excited for this group. Very excited for the front seven as a whole. Secondary, they lose 2 starters. They were middle of a pack group last season. They allowed over 3,000 yards and 22 touchdowns, but improvement should be a given due to who returns. But overall, a little iffy on this group. There's 3 guys we certainly feel good about, and that's Cole Bishop to lead things off. Great, versatile DB. He shined down the stretch of his debut season, 55 tackles, 9 tackle for loss. All 9 of those came across the final 6 games starting in November and ending in January. Same with his tackle numbers. Didn't play much early, provided a big boost late in the year, so I think Cole Bishop, over the course of full 12-plus games, he should certainly be an elite player for them this season. Clark Phillips, he's one of the nation's top corners. Great overall playmaker. He swats away balls like it's nothing, forces fumbles, tackles with energy. Overall, a good high IQ player and some impressive play speed as well. Travis Broughton, another vet that will occupy the other cornerback spot. Very sound CB duo here. The rest of the DBs are quite questionable, though. I think that's why this defense might take a step back. The pass rushing group a little iffy. And that's the best way that complement a secondary has its own struggles. So I'm very interested to see what happens, because I'm very excited for all 3 levels of the defense. But how fast can they gel is my biggest question mark for Utah. I think this is overall going to be a very sound unit. Obviously, they lose some playmakers from last year, but 11-1 for me. This is going to be a team that's going to be a playoff year for them, I would say, if they can beat USC at home. 11-1 for me, but that's the only blemish on their schedule. So I'd love to see this team compete and end up in the CFP, because they certainly have the potential to do so. Looking at the Oregon Ducks, 9-3. Dan Lanning inherits a bit of a project here, because late in the year they lost the head coach, the offensive coordinator, and the defensive coordinator to play in the bowl game. That was after getting hammered by Utah twice. They just had no energy one bit. So Lanning had to come in here and insert a lot of changes quickly, because this team had no energy, no confidence, it seemed, and now they're going to have to fix that here coming into the season in just a couple of months, and I think they will. They'll add Bo Nix to reunite with Kenny Dillingham. Never been a fan of the player, but always been a fan of the talent. Just rare when we see it for 4 quarters, let alone a full season. He's shown impressive skills, though, as a runner. He can make plays out of the pocket. He's certainly showed nice impressive arm talent as well. He's coming off a career best in terms of yards per game and yards per attempt at 229 and 7.1 respectively. A drop-off in competition here. He does face off against Georgia, a familiar opponent for him that he's given some issues to in week 1 in Atlanta. Lost plenty of skill at running back. They have a quality trio here. Byron Cardwell, nearly 7 yards per carry, 400-plus yards. And nearly all of that came over the back half of the season. Pretty good slasher for being 210. Sean Dollars, he stuck around and waited his turn. He's a quick, elusive back looking to get some time this season. And Seven McGee, he announced he's coming back, got a handful of touches in a few different facets last year. I believe he's moving to wide receiver this year, though, but that's certainly... if they need him at running back, he'll get involved. Noah Whittington, though, from Western Kentucky, he rounds things out. Averaged about 51 yards per game on 8 touches per contest, 600-plus yards on the year for that air raid attack. So I like the trio they have at running back. Not that's going to exactly blow you out of the water, but I think overall they're pretty happy with who they got. Depth should not be an issue there. I think the offensive line, though, leading the charge for them. They obviously lose Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, but the return of veterans Alex Forsythe at center and TJ Bass, who's going to move the tackle, or he moved the tackle last year and he still shined. He might pivot back inside, it appears, a great run blocker. Stephen Jones, he's been around a bit himself at tackle. They got pushed around by Utah, but over the course of the season, these guys were great. They had a field day against Ohio State, and then those games late were not good, but overall this is a very impressive offensive line for the Ducks, and I think it's one of the nation's better ones as we head into 2022. The Oregon wide receiver room was really talented last year. They lose 5 good pass catchers, including Travis Dye. He led the team in receptions last year. Chris Hudson, though, 5'11", 168, a speedy playmaker. Quietly ranked second on the team in yards. He's the top returning pass catcher. Troy Franklin is very similar size. Those two were very high-end recruits in their respective class. And the same could be said about Dante Thornton, 6'5", 200. They're looking to get those guys more involved. Chase Cota comes over from UCLA. 67 receptions, nearly 900 yards in his 4 years at UCLA. He's just unable to stay on the field. 7 games or less in 3 of his 4 years with the Bruins, but he's a veteran that's going to certainly provide an impact here. So not as much depth at wide receiver as they've had in the past few years, but they have some very impressive starters. I think Oregon, they're going to be pretty set up to do well here with Bo Nix under center. Looking at the defense, it was kind of a disappointing unit for Oregon last year. 27 points per game allowed, 384 yards per game. The pass rush was quite weak, though. Even with Kayvon Thibodeau, this team only had 23 sacks. Braden Swinson, he started the year with 2 sacks in 2 games. Only had 1 the rest of the year. He was an impact player early, and after missing 3 games after that, he just wasn't the same. DJ Johnson, Brendan Dorless, a defensive tackle. Dorless, one of the nation's best at his position. 7 tackles for loss last year for him. Lanning comes from a team that had nothing but heat on the D-line. This is a bit of a watered-down group that wasn't exactly great a season ago, so I'm very interested to see what we can get out of these guys. Run defense was quite good until the final 4 games where the wheels completely fell off. Jason Jones departs for Auburn. Keon Ware-Hudson, Popo Amuavi. Interior D-line is solid. It's a good starting point here. But getting to the QB is certainly a concern. I think Mace Funa, one of the more experienced players on this roster, they might look to him to generate some pass rushing production. Interesting group. I think the talent is certainly there. We'll see what Lanning can get out of them. Great group of linebackers, though. Justin Full, only one game in 2 years. He had 14 tackles, showcasing his sideline-to-sideline abilities against Fresno State. Noah Sewell, he's one of the nation's best linebackers, 114 stops, 8.5 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles. Great athletic abilities for his size. He was a great blitzer for them last year. Got home 4 times, ranking him second in sacks behind KT. So they're going to look to blitz him a lot if they can't get anything from their front four. Keith Brown, a former high-end recruit in his own right, he had 15 tackles on the year. He's also quite beat up. So I think getting a little bit healthier here at linebacker is certainly a big issue that they want to address. And I think if they can stay healthy, this is probably, I think it is one of the nation's better linebacking cores, definitely the top in the conference. Secondary wasn't great last year. They ranked 89th against the pass, ranked towards the bottom of the conference in touchdowns allowed of 22. They did snag 17 INTs, though, which led the conference. They lose a few starters, though. They do return Bennett Williams. He was their top playmaker early on in the year. He had 3 picks, 21 tackles in only 5 games before he broke a leg in practice. That proved to be really fatal for this secondary. They really struggled in his absence. Jamal Hill, he's been good in coverage, a nice slot corner there for Lanning to work with. Pretty deep safety room, though. Replacing Verone McKinley won't be easy. I'd say they're confident. Jeffrey Bassett, 48 tackles as a freshman last year. That was 5th on the team. They had Christian Gonzalez from Colorado, who shined over the past 2 seasons for the Buffaloes. He's great size for the run, 6'2", 200. Has shown his speed to run with fast wide receivers on the outside. He's got some pretty good ball skills. I like what Gonzalez brings to the table. And then Dante Manning, a former linebacker of good size and play recognition. They want to get him on the field to improve that run defense. Trick Wes Bridges, good length at 6'3". So I definitely think the secondary has a lot of room for improvement. I think Lanning will certainly get some good things out of them. Interesting Oregon team, because they return plenty of leftover talent from the Cristobal Ball days. Offense can certainly thrive with some balance here, and I think the defense will progress. There's no way they're going to be better, worse than they were last year. The O-line, a bit of a concern. I think they have some veterans that lead the charge here in the short term without Murabal and Mario Cristobal. But I think this is a really interesting team. It's going to be fun to see what they can do in Week 1 against Georgia. 10 games is certainly on the radar. They can definitely win this conference, though. Looking at the rest of our standings here, Oregon State 8-4. I do have them beating Oregon late in the year, but this is a very interesting football team. They return a lot on the offensive line. Wide receivers a little bit of an issue. They do get Treshaun Harrison back. Deshaun Fenwick's going to take over in the backfield, a big player. Headlining a pretty strong running back group as well, so I think their running game is going to be just as good as it was last year, maybe even better. Very interested to see what Chance Nolan does in his second year under Jonathan Smith, because you remember a couple years ago, Jake Luton performed very well in his second year as a starter with Smith. So I think that this offense is certainly going to progress pretty well, mainly because of how good the offensive line is, and I think Nolan, the expectations for me are pretty high. The pass rush is a bit of an issue, but overall the front seven does get Omar Spates back, who was a big-time leader for them last year. Andrew Chatfield, the Florida transfer, very interested to see what he can do as well. I like the secondary, too. Alex Austin, Rajon Wright, very sound cornerback duo. It's probably not getting enough love. And Jaden Grant, he's probably going to play slot this year. He's been around for like 7 years now. So Oregon State, I think this is a very sound football team. The defensive line is really the only biggest issue for me. I'd like to see some new linebackers as well step up because Avery Roberts now departs. Washington State, 6-6, but this is a very good football team. Obviously, they have a new regime here, but last year, under Jake Diker, they performed very well. Eric Morris comes over to implement this air raid, and Cam Ward, his quarterback and Incarnate Word with him, returns. So I think this passing attack is going to do a lot of damage this year because they get a lot of guys back at wide receiver like Lincoln Victor, Donovan Ali, and then Robert Furl. He follows those guys over from Incarnate Word. Interesting offensive line. They also got Renard Bell back as well. He's one of those guys that was in the Mike Leach days, so returns to his familiar scheme. I think that the offense is going to put up some numbers this year. I like the defense as well. A lot of seniors in the front seven, mainly on the defensive front. Ron Stone was an all-conference performer last year. I like what they got in the interior. And then the secondary adds a lot of transfers. They also have 2 returning notables as well in Amari Marsh and Derek Langford. Overall, there's great depth at pass rush on the interior. I think the secondary is going to figure things out. I do have them going 6-6 because I think they'll play a lot of close games, and there's it's a pretty difficult schedule for Washington State. But I do think the Cougars have an interesting bunch. They could be the sleeper team in this conference. Washington, the interesting quarterback room is going to be Sam Heward, is going to be Michael Penix, Dylan Morris. We'll see what happens at quarterback, but they're going to need more effort from its wide receivers. Last year, they're incredibly beat up. Their top 4 pass catchers were down one drive into the season when they lost to Montana. I think it was Montana State. An FCS school, regardless, they ended up losing that game. Some nice talent in the front seven, Zion Tulupu, and then Edon Uwafashio, 2 great first-round potential prospects there. And then they have some nice depth on the interior D-line as well. And then Savell Smalls, he should get involved as well. The biggest concern for Washington is their secondary, on the defensive side of the ball. Because the offensive side of the ball, even though they get Jackson Kirkland back, there's some concerns with the O-line. The running game has not been good the last couple of years. And obviously, wide receiver is not a very promising area for them. But in the secondary, they lose 2 first-round picks, or first-round prospects, rather. A lot of it, they're not going to be able to play man coverage like they were last year. That's a lot of athleticism they lose, a lot of skill. So I think Washington, 6-6, I think that'll be a good mark for them in their first year here under a new head coach. UCLA, Chip Kelly's defense, I think they're going to absolutely get scorched this year. There's just no promising there on that roster one bit other than the Hawaii transfer there at linebacker. They do pick up 2, the Murphy brothers as well from UNT to be on their defensive line. That's an interesting part of their defense, but overall, I think that unit's going to get scorched. Wide receiver isn't exactly promising. They're going to have to get some young guys involved. Zach Charbonnet and Dorian Thompson-Robinson coming back, though. Those guys are going to lead the charge. 6-6 for me for UCLA. With the playmaking on offense, though, they could certainly win more games than that. I just don't see it. Arizona State, a lot of transfers are gone. Herm Edwards lost a lot of staff as well. Emory Jones comes over. I think they have a very sound backfield, though. Xavier Holiday, he comes over from Wyoming. They mix him with Tevin White and Daniel Nagata. I think this is a very interesting backfield. A lot of missing talent at wide receiver, though. Same with defense. They were very good last year. They lose a lot of guys, mainly in the secondary, too. Kyle Scholes back at linebacker. I do think that Trevez Moore is going to be an interesting guy at defensive end. So we'll see what happens there. They also picked up Corley Bethley from Hawaii, another guy that comes over from the Rainbow Warriors, the insert at safety. He was a stashy stuffer last year. Jack Plummer, very interested to see what he can do. Jaden Knott comes over. He's a new freshman at running back. Very interested to see what Cal can do. I think their offense will be one of the better units they've had in the last couple of years. That's not saying much. They lose some very important players, but they add Peter Sherman's son, Jackson, at linebacker. Also got Daniel Scott at safety. So I think this is a pretty interesting lineup here for Cal. 4-8 for me. I think the defense will be good, but I think they'll regress because they do lose some guys on the D-line. Arizona, very interested to see this bunch this fall. Arizona, very interested to see this bunch because there's a lot of freshmen on offense that Jed Fish is going to get involved, along with 2 transfers in Jane Delora and Jacob Cowling. Jack Buford at left tackle, another one of those rising guys they're interested in. But Jonah Coleman, Kevin Green, Tatorian McMillan, Keon Burnett. Those are some of the freshmen I'm eyeing this season. There's a lot of young talent here, and I think they're really going to get things going. I think there's going to be a lot of explosiveness on this offense this season. I think that this unit's going to lead the way. The defense obviously has a lot of work. They do get back some veterans in the secondary. Christian Turner, I like Kion Bars at defensive tackle. Jalen Harris is pretty solid as well. I think the defense has a lot of work to do. They do pick up Anthony Solomon from Michigan at linebacker. Malik Reed, he's been solid for them. So we'll see what happens, but overall I think the defense has a lot of work to do. But this offense, I'm very excited to see what they can do this season. 4 wins for me. I think they'll be a very good bunch for them. Stanford, this is a very tough team to predict because I think the defensive line, they lose 4 starters and they had no depth last year, so they obviously have no depth this year. It's going to get even worse. I think they're going to get bodied in the trenches. They returned 5 starters on the O-line. They've not hit their potential like we've expected to in the David Shaw era. That's a theme that we've saw that's been lost the last couple of years. The offensive running game has just disappeared, and the same for the defense. They were terrible in the trenches in both facets last year. I think the offense has some potential because of those 5 returning starters. Tanner McKee is also a pretty polished quarterback, and he gets some weapons back as well. Bryson Tremaine, Michael Wilson. They also have a great tight end as well. So I think this is an interesting Stanford team. 3-9 for me, but they could certainly cause some fits just because I don't think they're going to be able to stop anybody. They have no depth one bit. David Bailey, an incoming freshman, they're going to ask him to do a lot this season. The linebackers, and good for them, they have some solid depth because those linebackers are going to get beat up a lot this year because they're going to have to step up and make plays every single time a running back has the football because this defensive line, they're going to be so worn down. I mean, the 2 guys they do have, they don't have a lot of size. They're young freshmen. They're going to have to get involved, and their frames are not well built out one bit. There's no depth at all on the D-line, so these guys are going to get absolutely hammered, I think, in the running game. And Benjamin Yursick was the tight end I was speaking of as well. I do think the return of Marcus Williamson mixed with Kai Blue Kelly and then Patrick Fields, an Oklahoma transfer. Solid, respectable secondary. It wasn't a great group last year. They were pretty solid. I think they probably impressed more than the defensive line did, that's for sure. So Stanford 3-9 for me. I just think they're going to get scorched on the ground. They're not going to be able to stop anybody. And it's just going to be tough for them for 60 minutes. And then Colorado, I don't see them winning a single game this year. A lot of guys transfer out. Carl Dorrell, not really the ideal coach, I think, in my opinion. The passing attack was almost down there with Air Force last year in terms of yards per game. They were just not good. I do think Ramon Jefferson's going to be a star at running back. They picked him up in the portal. But other than that, the defense, they were not good one bit last year. Despite having great individual players, they still had like 30-plus points per game. And now they lose a lot of guys in total. So Colorado 0-12 for me, top to bottom. solid conference, nothing too great. I do think that the top 3 teams, though, have playoff potential. Looking at the conference title and some award predictions, Nick was unable to join us today, but we both have USC over Utah, and then we have them advancing to the college football playoff. Caleb Williams as newcomer and Offensive Player of the Year. Cameron Ward for Nick, coming over from Incarnate Word of Eric Morris in that air raid. He had phenomenal stats last year, almost 50 touchdowns, almost 5,000 yards. Coach of the Year is obviously going to be Lincoln Riley. I just spoke to David Bailey. He's going to be expected to do so much for Stanford this year. I think he's going to be a big breakout star right away. We'll see what he can do. A lot of responsibilities here in year 1. And then Micah Bernard was the breakout star for Nick, the backup running back for Utah. I agree. That's a pretty sound offensive line. They're going to want to run the ball in between the tackles, and they're going to want to just be enforcers on the ground. I think they'll certainly do that. He has Van Fillinger stepping up and winning Defensive Player of the Year. I'm going to go with Noah Sewell. He had a big-time season for Oregon last year. He's only going to continue to get better. I think that he's going to have a lot of sacks this year as well because they're going to really need to get him involved. So Noah Sewell for me. And then the sleeper team, Washington State. I kind of raved about how much talent they had coming back. They have a lot of depth on defense. Secondary's got some promising guys. And then, of course, Eric Morris and Cam Ward, that offense, with those pass catchers they have. The sky's the limit for Washington State. 6-6 for me, but I definitely think that they could even win this conference because they're really just waiting in the wings, I think. And then Nick went with Washington, mainly probably because of what they have in the front 7. Secondary, obviously, have some concerns. And the offense, I'm not really high on them, but Nick sees a little bit of potential in them, so we'll go with that. That's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.